I know that you have had quite a few questions around Microsoft InTune, remote working, how to help control your remote devices. So, not only do I have an amazing special guest in Nicholas Martin, my fellow colleague, but also in the fact that we will go through some of these questions that you've asked in perpetuity today. Now, on top of that, there is the burning question about VMware. I will certainly address some of that. Quick one, VMware is increasing its pricing. It is already out in the papers. Yes, there are a lot of disruptions to VMware users. So, quick one on that one. Have you got access to your licensing? Possibly speak to your advisor or your MSP about that. And if you don't, let me know. I'm more than happy to help you about that. Pricing has certainly changed in the way it's structured. It is no longer an annual subscription option or BYOD option. You only have monthly options. Can you move to an alternative? Absolutely. There are a ton out there. And if you want to learn how, you can feel free to reach out. I know that a number of you have done so already. Now, without much further ado, let me introduce Nick to the call. Hi, Nick.
Hi, happy Friday.
Mate, it is. Happy International Women's Day too, by the way. It is a fantastic point to be celebrating today. Now, Nick, I've been inundated with questions, and I know that when you work with me at ASC, we roll out InTune quite a number of times, but the questions that have been raised are certainly around what is InTune. So, may I flick that over to you?
Yeah, sure. That's a really good question because InTune is not a particularly descriptive name, is it?
No.
InTune is Microsoft's cloud solution to endpoint management.
Okay.
So historically, if you wanted an enterprise-grade endpoint management solution for your fleet, you were looking at Microsoft's other solution, SCCM, which requires...
System Configuration Manager, System Center
That's
Configuration
the one.
I'm haunting back to my old school engineering days there.
Yeah. There's still a fair bit of it around, but less and less so. And for good reason. It certainly has its place, but InTune is a far more cost-effective, and I think as Microsoft's putting the greater amount of effort into it, the far more feature-rich solution to managing endpoints.
It's a fair point, especially when you consider that SCCM, whilst it's enterprise targeted, the features, as you say, and development has also been pushed into the Microsoft InTune product. And we see that in the way it is able to manage fleets from, a couple or handful of devices all the way through to thousands. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, definitely. Where it really falls short is, you might only manage a handful of devices, but you'll need a handful of techs just to maintain that one system.
That is a very, very good point. And that is why if you have a small to medium enterprise working with someone like ourselves who have an extensive amount of resources and experience in this is also beneficial. Now, one of the key questions that were raised, and you've just made a good point about why wouldn't you use InTune or where wouldn't you use InTune?
So places where InTune probably isn't the most appropriate tool is the BYOD or bring your own devices space. Microsoft has lots of controls for ensuring that your data remains yours and within your control when working on other devices, but InTune doesn't really cover over that. That's more of a security center solution.
Okay, good. Interesting point that you should make around that. So when we are talking about security, what are the benefits of using something like InTune in regards to that?
Well, InTune's really cool in that the customization for the security is really feature rich, but where it stepped into its own is you can control the endpoint so specifically that you can have different configurations on different devices to meet different standards. So I'll give you an example of this. I was doing work for quite a large organization. They were doing an InTune deployment, and they were looking to reach Essential 8 maturity level 1 with their managed operating environment. So I went through this process with them. It was designed, it was rolled out, and then they realized, hey, our IT team actually needs to do a few things that sort of sit outside the recommendations.
Right.
And to do that, it was just as simple as creating another security profile, assigning it to the appropriate users and devices, and then the IT team was able to complete their tasks without having a completely exposed device. We just edited those few little settings that allowed them to complete their job.
Now, you make a really interesting point about this. I mean, we're seeing a lot of this in the market where people are trying to achieve an Essential 8 maturity level, right? And we as ASE have been certainly addressing this for a lot of our customers. Now, there is actually quite a bit of detail around how organizations can achieve that using Intune. Is that correct?
That's correct. In fact, the Australian government actually releases their recommendations in the context of an Intune deployment.
Okay. And there's a fair bit of detail about that, if I'm not wrong.
Pages.
And that's one of the advantages when we start talking about, say, application deployment, configuration management, and security, especially utilizing this Intune platform. And we're certainly seeing that, especially when we're talking about ASD compliance to Essential 8. There are other security frameworks, NIST, for example, and ISO, but this can also, using those configured profiles, be deployed to apply towards those frameworks. Is that a fair?
Yeah, most definitely. The beauty of Intune is most of the documentation related to these guidelines that you've mentioned. Microsoft, for better or for worse, owns the market share, and most of these guidelines are directed from Microsoft platform. So Intune really gets the support it needs in terms of those recommendations.
And you're making a really fair point about that, especially in regards to the fact that the ASD Essential 8 really is Microsoft centric. And we're seeing that, especially with our customers that work in the Linux/Mac/Ubuntu type environments, that some of the controls and categories that they have within those Essential 8s can't be applied purely by the fact that they aren't Microsoft specific machines and don't have certain controls or let's call it categories that they can be applied to. In that case, you would look at alternative tooling, as we do, correct?
Yes, yep.
To be able to apply those, because not every infrastructure or every environment is Microsoft centric. So it is something just to keep in mind when you are looking at something like this. Now, one of the key factors and one of the reasons I've been reached out a lot recently is the term, why am I getting value from applying this? What would you say to that?
Well, the first thing I would check is what licensing you currently have, because there's a good chance Intune is already a part of your environment and it's just not being utilized. So in addition to that, getting your money's worth for what you're already spending, it's going to add value as it will be the first step for transitioning away from an on-premises managed environment. Mm-hmm. So if you've still got your Active Directory on site, you've got your data servers, full stack Microsoft, Intune will be the first step to sort of rolling back some of those big capital expenditures, such as licensing, hardware, warranty, things of that nature.
All those nasty gotchas that people have to budget for on an annual basis, right?
Yeah, and instead you, once you've got your deployment fixed, you know what it's going to cost you each month because it's a flat rate license.
This is a fair point. And on top of that, I mean, one of the key assets that you've just literally talked about, right, is Intune is part of a greater stack. You know, you've mentioned when you move into the cloud, you move your on-premise Active Directory, for example, into something like Azure AD. And then when you start to look at managing a fleet of devices, you can actually start using Microsoft Hello as the building mechanism, which taps into Intune. Is that right?
Yeah, Microsoft Hello is part of Intune, but where you're going to really see that building is the autopilot space.
Good point.
Shall we talk about autopilot for a moment?
Go for it. Tell me all about it.
Yeah, so what autopilot is I'll give you a scenario. You have a new remote user, whether they be in Sydney, in Perth, or maybe even overseas. Now you need to get a device provision for them. You need to make sure that it's compliant with your security policy. It has access to all the resources they need, and it's accessible to them. So historically, what that might have looked like is you ordered a laptop. It gets sent to ASE or your other MSP if you have one. The computer is then built. It is then sent out to the end user. And that whole process takes between 2 or 3 shipping cycles, time to get set up. 2 weeks, really.
Especially if
Definitely.
you're talking an international. And the other thing about that, and you make this really valid point, say you've got an international deployment. If you acquire assets from Australia and ship them overseas, sometimes the warranty doesn't actually get covered overseas by the fact that it's not in that region. So makes a good point.
So I'll give you the alternative scenario is you call up ASE. Hey, ASE, we need a new laptop shipped to wherever, the Philippines.
Yep.
It gets drop shipped. And in the 3 or 4 days it takes to get shipped, I upload the Intune hash or the device hash into Intune, and the user turns it on. They sign in with.
Oh no, looks like I might have dropped you there, Nick. Hopefully you'll drop back in. But the correct scenario that Nick was referring to was literally when the device is then brought up back online, it automates the process. Is that a fair way of talking about it? Unfortunately, I think I just dropped you out. Try it again, Nick.
All right, where'd we get up to? We were talking about the Intune drop shipping.
Correct. So the device is drop shipped, the users open it up, they've entered in credentials.
Intune deploys whatever security or configuration profiles are assigned to that device and that user in the space of maybe half an hour, and the user is ready to work straight away.
It's pretty amazing.
No IT needed.
Yeah, and look, and that really is what when we start talking about that whole stack where you can then make these processes seamless and integrated, plus we can report on it, right? So we can actually see what's been done, how often it's been occurred, and then you can make sure that those devices are managed and checked in. Fair?
Yeah.
Brilliant. All right. So, look, I mean, we've got a fair few questions that have come through, and I appreciate you taking us all the way through to autopilot. If you do have any more questions out there about this, please let us know. I'm more than happy to give you a bit more detail. In fact, Nick and I will be doing a bit of a education session, shall we say, at the end of March, where ASE will be running our invite drinks. Feel free to reach out, meet the team, ask some of the questions around autopilot, around Intune, around Copilot even. So feel free to reach out. The invite can be extended to yourself. So thank you again, Nick, for joining us. I know that was a bit of a last minute question for myself, but I needed the expert to start explaining some of this stuff because it's been a while since I've been on the keys.
My pleasure. Always happy to answer whatever I can.
Brilliant. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us. I appreciate that there are a number of comments. I have seen them. I will get back to you, I promise. It's just that the platform doesn't allow us to interact as well. And as always, feel free to reach out with any other questions or tech tips that you would like addressed in the comments below. Now, be safe. Have yourself a fantastic International Women's Day. I believe it's going to be a scorcher, Nick, so do put your hat on this weekend.
I'll do my best.
And until next week, everyone, stay safe. Remember, I say, think before you click, and have a fantastic week. Thanks for joining me, Nick, and we'll see you again.